All right. Well, thank you, everyone. You should be seeing Ross Frank now featured as our speaker for the virtual tree farm tour. This is where we would have gotten into the bus and driven out to his family farm, where they would have made us a very nice lunch. And then we'd go out and take a walk around the tree farm with full bellies. And after this, we would get back in our vans and drive to 2 or 3 stops upstream from Ross's house. And then we would have called that a wrap for the conference. But in the absence of being able to do that, Ross is going to give us a virtual tree farm tour today. His long description of his biography is in your program on page 14. And so I'm going to read the first part of it, and then I'll let Ross take it from here. And Ross, I think you'll have about 35 minutes to poke around and tell us what you know. Okay. So Ross and Marianne Frank moved to Leavenworth in 1974 after graduating from the University of Michigan, where Ross earned a degree in natural resources. Ross did logging for WI Forest Products, Mountain Skyliners, and Slater Horse Logging until 1981. In 1984, Ross started Red Tail Canyon Horse Logging and logged commercially for private landowners in Chelan County for the next 9 years. During this time period, Ross and Marianne expanded the horse business by offering sleigh rides, hay rides, and barbecues, weddings, and other group events. Their 37th year of sleigh rides just concluded this February. When Ross and Marianne started Red Tail Canyon Farm 43 years ago, it was their vision to couple their natural capabilities, multi-uses, and beauty of their draft horses with the scenic beauty, diverse natural resources, and multi-uses of Red Tail Canyon Farm, and in doing so, create a home to raise their family and build a homestead on which to sustain tree farming. Ross and Marianne were named Washington State Outstanding Tree Farmers in 1991. Ross is currently active as a founder and past chair of the Chumstick Wildfire Stewardship Coalition and a fire commissioner for Chelan County Fire District number 3. And they believe in the culture of rural lifestyle and the code of the West. Live each day with courage, take pride in your work, always finish what you start. When you make a promise, keep it, and remember that some things aren't for sale. Thank you for having us, Ross.
Thank you, Andy. It's an honor to be here talking to you folks, many of whom I know, and we've shared our efforts over the years. So welcome to Red Tail Canyon Farm. I'll give you a little, this is going to be a virtual field trip, and hopefully I won't make you seasick or dizzy as we walk around. And as I told Andy earlier, if my walking and talking don't sync and it starts giving you a headache or you can't understand me, just holler. But this is Red Tail Canyon here. We're facing west. This is our home and the horse barn. We're facing north. There's our shop. There's a tree farm sign there in the shop. I hope you can see it. There's our first home, the log part. Actually, our first home was a teepee. We lived in it for a year while we built the log part of that house. And now, to our great pleasure, our son and his family are living in it. They moved back 2 years ago. Here's our lodge where we host our group activities. Has a commercial kitchen. The wedding arch in the foreground. We host weddings, group events, serve as an outdoor classroom for many different types of groups. And here's some of our forest. The ranch is 120 acres, 90 of which is in timber. We're facing south now on a north-facing slope, which you can see some of this thinning there, which was accomplished in 2017. So, Andy read our goal when we first moved here, which was to unite working draft horses and their capabilities with resources and capabilities to make a living and create a lifestyle. And so that a lot of what we've done here has been lifestyle choices rather than career choices. We're married to the land here. So our vision here at the family forest is to transform our forest into a healthy, sustainable forest. And what we found here in 1978, when we moved on to the land, was that this was an overstocked second growth forest that had been neglected since the initial harvest at the turn of the century, between 1900 and 1920. The farm or ranch was platted in 1908 as part of the Homestead Act. It's originally a 160-acre homestead, of which we have 120. So when we arrived here, we essentially moved into a forest weed patch, and extremely overstocked. Much of the ground you'd have to walk sideways to get through the stands. The fuel loading was extreme, and the three pastures on our 120 acres were being reclaimed by the forest, which was fine unless you wanted to use them as a pasture. So this is typical of what we found here. You can see how dense that is and how this is how our stand looked, with dominant trees scattered through that. So this is our ultimate goal, is this. And finally, after years of working here on various parts of the land, in 2017, we went for the hillsides here with a feller buncher and a commercial logger, and brought everything on the land to a sustainable, thinned, and we hope healthy forest. And we're very happy we finally got to this point. It's been 43-year effort. I hope you could see that. So that's our vision. And along the way, we've had a number of challenges and lessons learned. The horsepower aspect in the tourism of Leavenworth put together allowed us to make a living here on the land and use horses, which we feel very blessed for that. It's hard to make a living with horses, and the tourism saved us. In my time as a horse logger in the 9 years, the log market was so volatile, up and down. You didn't know from one season to the next whether you could sell logs or not, or even if the sawmill was going to be open to take logs. Plus the fact that Chelan County is mountainous, and there's limited private land here, and it wasn't the best ground for horse logging. So I managed to do that for 9 years. I met a lot of great people, small landowners, and did what I hope was a good timber stand improvement for them. And in the process, I learned how to work horses, because my 2 years prior to that in Michigan, I worked on a draft horse ranch while I was in college, and I was introduced to draft horses and learned a lot. But my real lessons came here in the woods when I was logging with them. And horse logging is a young buck sport. You have to want to do this, and it's a lifestyle. You're not going to get rich doing it, and you're going to be wore out at night. However, it's very satisfying. If you're a horseman, you understand the value of being a partner with your horse. And there's things to be said about that are hard to put into words at times. But I feel fortunate for having had that opportunity. So from there, with our vision of turning it into a healthy, sustainable forest, our challenges were the timber stand improvement. And I showed you that with the two examples of before and after. The other aspect was mitigate the wildfire danger in heavy field loading here, which timber stand improvement and the wildfire mitigation go hand in hand. And then much of our efforts non-commercially, we're here clearing out the brush in the understory and in the fuels. And so that's been ongoing, and it still is ongoing, as we all know. Reducing fuels once only sets it up for doing it again later in a number of years afterwards. So I'm going to introduce you to the horsepower here. This is Brita. She's a Brabant draft horse, and her brother behind her, Brick. He's her full brother. The Brabant breed is from the Netherlands, and they're our current logging team, and we use it for all the other multiple use capabilities, sleigh rides, hay rides, and farming. They don't do as much logging as my previous teams when I was more active in the horse logging, but they're a team to be reckoned with. They can pull a mountain when they're of a mind to. And then over here is a May horse. I hope you can see that and I'm aiming it correctly. May horse is a 9-year-old Suffolk draft horse. There's only 1,500 Suffolks in the world. She's in training. She's going through finishing school, and hopefully when we find her a partner, she'll be our future logging team and farm team. As we downsize here, I've kept up to 16 draft horses at the height of our career here. And we've downsized now to these 3. And at my age of being 70, that's enough horsepower for me. But I plan on horsing around here until they cart me off. And so these are my partners. They're a great tool and a lot of fun to partner and work with. And down there's our pack mule and riding horses. And, we use them for riding and packing, and that's more a personal horsing around there. This is a horse-drawn logging arch. This is modern technology applied to the old craft of horse logging. And it's just like the log arches you find on skidders. As you move forward with the log attached to the back here, the hook underneath raises up, suspends the log on one end off the ground, and makes it easier to skid and lighter on the ground. So I've used this a fair amount in my later days of logging, and still use it here on the ranch. Prior to that, all our skidding was ground skidding with a steel double tree and a hook and chain. Let's see, where are we? With our objectives of timber stand improvement and mitigating the wildfire threat, we're attempting to make a living here also, and that's where the tourism came in. And we started with the sleigh rides and the hay rides. And in doing so, it provided an opportunity for myself and our drivers in our family to converse with the public about what a tree farm is and what it means to live in an Eastern Washington ponderosa pine forest and what it means to live with wildfire. And so we took advantage of the captive audience while they were seated in these sleighs that are covered, but you can see, to deliver that message. And it made people curious. They'd ask questions, and we would go down the road with that discussion. We also have hosted a lot of classes from elementary school through high school and college out here, and have done field trips, workshops with them, and tried to give them a private landowner's tree farming perspective. Right here is our sawmill. It's a small mobile bandsaw sawmill. It's covered up, and here's some logs that I plan on milling. However, and so what we did is all the buildings on the ranch are built from wood off the ranch and whole or in part. Our horse barn here is all wood from the ranch except for the trusses. The frame is Douglas fir. The siding's ponderosa pine. And I was listening to Andy earlier, and he was trying injecting some humor into his talk, and so I'm going to match that a little bit here. As you can see in this wall right here, all the knots are in line. I hope you can see that. So the knots are in line because when I milled the log, I numbered the boards, I put the boards up in order. I got 5 logs from one tree, so I put the logs up in order from stump log all the way around to the top log. So this end of the barn is wrapped up in one tree, put up in order. It's important to have your knots in line. And then up on our house, up here, all the outside walls and inside walls where we have paneling, all the knots are in line there also. The problem was with that, all of that though, was that after I finished the house, I had to go into counseling. And my counselor told me I was a knothead. And I told her I thought I was just a little bored. So there, hopefully a little humor for you. So the end game for us as tree farmers, and part of our vision is to pass the tree farm on to the next generation. And part of our son and daughter-in-law moving here is that they brought the grandchildren. And while our son has his own career, it's our hope that as they inherit the tree farm here, that the grandchildren will inherit a land ethic and a desire to continue the family forest into the future. There's a lot of problems with that in today's world. One of the problems is that it's hard to sustain a tree farm in Eastern Washington. We have a lot of impediments to tree farming. And one of the biggest things I feel is that there's no outlet, viable economic outlet for our products. We have to ship our logs to the west side. In our 2017 harvest, a third of our gross income was spent on freight, and that's 41 years of waiting for that size of harvest, only to give away a third of the revenue just for hauling logs. And then we were also subject to west side prices and the west side scale, which is not east side scale. So that's a major impediment. The other part of that equation is that there are very few loggers, relatively speaking, left in our region. And they spent a lot of time on the west side logging. And when the market's up and there's a demand by landowners or agencies to log in this area, you can't find the loggers because their plate's full, and what few that there are very busy. In our struggle to get the 2017 harvest accomplished, it was a 4-year effort. We were essentially on a waiting list that was there was a moving target, and it was only by a stroke of luck that we landed a commercial logger, and we're able to get him on the ground here for the 10 weeks that it took to do our commercial harvest. And that was a very narrow window, and we were very fortunate to get it accomplished. It was a huge frustration not being able to get a commercial logger that we felt capable of doing the job we needed done here on the ground in a market context that made it economically feasible. So we were very fortunate that we found the logger at a time when the log prices were strong enough to go ahead and with the harvest, and that's had a big part in what you've seen here on the hillsides with the entire ranch. Looks like this on all the north-facing slopes, and on the south-facing slopes, we primarily left them alone. They were scattered ponderosa pine, and it was a droughty site, and we didn't want to impact those slopes. They're too fragile, and there's too little volume there to warrant that kind of an entry. One of the projects that I'm working on here currently on the tree farm is our aspen. Aspen forest wide is somewhat endangered, and part of it is because of fire exclusion. Their aspen stands are getting overgrown by competing conifers and other vegetation, and they're not prospering. So as you can see here, past the house and going up canyon, there's a small stand of aspen. Then there's a gap where that gate is, and then there's a smaller patch of aspen. So my goal is to unite the small patch of aspen with this little larger patch and have one continuous large patch of aspen. This is my little micro project here on the tree farm, and try and preserve part of the aspen aspect of the forest. When I first made my entry into there, you literally had to crawl on your hands and knees to get through that aspen, and it was starting to go away with the conifers overgrowing it and competing brush. Part of one of the programs that, or one of the practices that we do here on the ranch is we do a prescribed burn every spring. And because of my work with the fire as a fire commissioner, I volunteer our land as a burning ground for our firefighters to practice wildland firefighting and qualify for their red cards and get some experience fighting live fire. And that aspen stand here by the house, we burned that as an exercise about 5 years ago. And it was a real eye-opener, and watching how it responded since then has been very educational. And so every year we pick a different part of the ranch, 1 to 2 acres, depending on the site. And the firefighters get their training in, and I, as a landowner, get a little bit of treatment on the ground. Some of the challenges over the years that we've had on the tree farm, one of the biggest ones was the spotted owl, the Endangered Species Act. I won't get into the weeds on that topic so much because you're all well versed in the history of that, but we were in an owl circle and essentially shut down. And in 94, roughly, their log prices were really high. It would have been a good time to stage a commercial thin. And we as private landowners were not able to do that because we were in that what was called a spotted owl circle at that time. That was a long soap opera. Came with a lot of lessons, and that's another topic. Yeah, the other thing that came is the 94 fire. And the 94 fire was a history-making fire for this area, and it had a huge impact on us. It was right behind, it came as close as right behind the canyon wall behind me. We were evacuated. The only reason the fire did not come into the canyon is the wind shifted that day and sent the fire south to Tumwater Mountain and threatened Leavenworth. That had a big impression on all of the residents in Leavenworth, and it was one of the main causes of my continued involvement in wildfire later on with the coalition and with the fire department and my efforts here. It was a real eye opener. And a lot of the lessons learned there are the same lessons that we continue to learn today. And, the only thing that keeps changing is the vocabulary and the number of meetings to discuss it. Vocabulary keeps changing and the number of meetings discussing that problem continues to amp up. And what we need is less meetings and more real work on the ground. That's another one of my lessons at the time, my involvement with wildfire and tree farming. Yeah, the other lesson was, or the other challenge was Longview Fiber's mill shutting down at Winton. It was a small log mill. It was state of the art, and it was a travesty to our timber economy and to our private landowners in our public lands as well, losing that mill. And we lost a lot of ground losing that mill. And it was unfortunate. We lost 100 jobs. We lost an outlet for local wood, and it's changed everything as far as our ability to move biomass at the saw log level off the land, which is dearly needed here. So that leads me to one of our real problems, and many of you are aware, our biggest impediment here is locally for private landowners and for all of our wildfire safe objectives and projects is the lack of biomass outlet. We have nowhere to ship or to process or to get rid of the biomass that we glean off the land. It needs to come out as excess fuel and saw logs. And that is a huge impediment. And this area here is even further restricted. And the two other problems are the apple maggot quarantine. So we're not allowed to move our brush and biomass out of the area because of that quarantine. And because of smoke management and burning, and the constraints that burning has come under, it has eliminated one more or compromised one more tool in the elimination of that biomass. When we lost our sawmill, the apple maggot quarantine, nowhere to send biomass like they have in Kettle Falls with their power generation plant. It stymies private landowners from wanting to be tree farmers because economically and physically that impediment keeps it from penciling out and making sense. And it also it's an impediment to the Chumstick Wildfire Stewardship Coalition, to the local fire district, to private foresters and land managers trying to educate our landowners and being wildfire safe. when they have nowhere to take the biomass that we've tried to educate and encourage them to take off the land and make a healthier forest and a safer home, they have nowhere to take it. It doesn't make sense. It's a wall, and it's a huge impediment. The fact that we have nowhere to take our saw logs when we need to do commercial harvest on a lot of this ground that we've done a good job taking out the understory and reducing the fuel load at the ground and level with the brush and such. And then the next thing to do is to thin out the stand, which is still highly vulnerable to fire, with no outlet for these saw logs and no or marginal return to the landowner for a huge effort. That's another impediment, and we're beating the drums here, trying to educate our residents to be wildfire resilient, be smart about fuels and so on. And then at the other end of that equation, we've got this major stumbling block for accomplishing real work. In the time that when I first started getting involved with the neighborhood groups, and then later forming Chumpstick Wildfire Stewardship Coalition, my personal goal, and I felt our only measure of success at that time, was the measure of success is real work. And real work I defined as an actual physical change to the landscape. And so without any physical change to the landscape, such as this forest behind me, and wildfire safe homes, such as I hope our home up here is, in a physical change, we've accomplished nothing to mitigate the problem. It's a double-edged sword, and the other side of that is outreach and education. And we spend a lot of time trying to educate people and making our culture wildfire resilient. So it's a double-edged sword for me. Accomplishing real work on the landscape and actual physical change to create a healthy forest and wildfire safe environment, and a change in our culture where people understand that living with wildfire and they become wildfire resilient as part of their lifestyle and our culture. Right now, as I've stated, we need to resolve our problem with moving biomass here. And it's been the elephant in the room since I've become involved in this for the last almost, 18 years. And I know that people are working on it. We've worked on it in the past. Some of the agencies need to come aboard. I feel that the Forest Service, the Wenatchee Okanagan Forest, at some point is going to have to step up and make a commitment, and make a commitment so that we can justify economically having a sawmill here. And they need to agree that an annual cut is on their radar screen and can be relied upon, because that's one huge factor in the economic equation that needs to be accomplished to justify the millions of dollars it's going to take to build a facility here to address the biomass problem. The other aspect of that is there are remedies that we've seen in models around the country, such as cogen plants, like we have in Kettle Falls. Several of the ones that some of the timber industry has built in California that are just small 3 kilowatt, 5 kilowatt cogen plants. And if you set a small sawmill next to them, you will have hopefully a viable outlet for biomass and a way to serve the community and provide some jobs and create hopefully a sustainable model. PUD could weigh in on this. They're buying power from out of the area. And maybe if they created help create a facility here where they didn't have to buy that power from out of the area and they were serving the community with our needs here locally, that would be helpful. The other part is private landowners, when they're going through the process of applying for their forest practices permit, they're going to run into the forest practices forester, and that can go a number of different ways in our experience. And instead of sometimes it's more antagonistic than proactive, and we need to turn that around. I know there's efforts being made to do that, but my perception is with DNR that sometimes the forest practices part of the brain, DNR brain, and the forest stewardship part of the brain really don't talk to each other, and they're not in sync. And one concept would be to have your forest practices forester and the forest stewardship forester arrive together to visit with the landowner in a proactive fashion that help them create a successful forest practice permit in a successful practice, whatever it happens to be in their particular situation. The Good Neighbor Authority, the Forest Service, along our boundaries here, we have a lot of miles of boundary with private landowners and the Forest Service. We need more proactive willingness on the Forest Service to cultivate those kind of relationships, and maybe come up with some landscape-wide private to public lands projects. That's one of our huge, I think one of the biggest problems right now in wildfire safe is that it's real easy for agencies to deal with their own land on a 500,000 acre scale. It's all one ownership and they're in control of it, and they only have to deal with themselves to accomplish the project, either DNR or Forest Service. But to deal with private landowners with small acreage to medium acreage size landscapes, with 10, 20 owners and one drainage, to try and coordinate them and get them on board and make it viable for them, that is a huge challenge. And it needs to be addressed, and we need to make it as easy as possible with support for these landowners to come together as neighborhoods, drain canyons, watersheds, whatever it takes to start accomplishing some landscape treatments across private lands into public lands. You'll hear after me about the Spromberg project from Corinne and others, and that is an example of 10 neighbors coming together as one to accomplish something, and that was our first success at that scale. And we need more of that, and we need all the players, all the stakeholders to come to the table and figure out a way of accomplishing that, making it so that private landowners can have success in their efforts and have the motivation to move forward, knowing that their efforts to get this material off the land is doable and is not going to break them. And there's a lot of things going on that are addressing that, attempting to mitigate it. The challenges continue. We need to keep after it. The one thing I've noticed in my years of working is that sometimes you're rolling a boulder up a hill, and I use that example a lot. And the boulder is capable of running back over you until you peak out. And sometimes that's a long haul getting up to that peak. And you have to be patient and you have to have perseverance. I found that our greatest success as a volunteer as a private person and a person working with local grassroots groups is that working on the grassroots level, I see the greatest amount of success. It's at the micro level, one homeowner at a time, but at least you can see you're getting some change, you're getting some treatment on the ground, and you're seeing results. And that's for me a lot more edifying than attending meetings ad nauseum in the higher up bureaucratic world and agency world, where it can eat up volunteers and discourage them, and progress can be very slow. And that's not to end this on a negative note. It's just my reality and lesson learned. It's my hope that we can keep this open space here on the ranch for future generations. That open space at the low elevation Ponderosa pine forest is somewhat endangered now with the growth that we're experiencing and the WUI expanding at record levels. And we need this kind of forest into the future for wildlife and for timber and all the multiple uses and values that we who live here came here to value. But anyway, I think I'm up against the clock here. So if you have any quick questions.
Well, thank you, Ross. That was fantastic. Thanks for the walk around too. I appreciate that. I feel like I should have a coat on right now. You have one question that I see, and it's from Don Hanley, who you know from WSU. I think you guys put on a field day back in the 80s together.
Oh, that's great. Hi, Don.
Yeah.
Wow, it's been a long time.
So Don asked, have you taught your son to be a horse logger, or what other plans have you made for your family's next generation?
Well, our son is a horse logger by default in osmosis. Although he chose to become a police officer instead, and that's his career now. I have hope that his children, who are 6 and 8, and our other grandchildren, if I continue living long enough, and I've already started with the 6 and 8-year-old and teaching them horsemanship, we'll have that opportunity going forward. We'll see. We're still horse oriented here and tree farm oriented. The kids have been out helping me pile slash. They help me burn piles, and they understand the idea of thinning and we're learning. It's an outdoor classroom here, and hopefully as our son and daughter-in-law build their permanent home here, that they'll take this on and understand the value of it. One thing I've learned though, as I've grown older, is that when you hand things off to the next generation, you're not in charge anymore.
Okay. One final question, and then we're gonna go ahead and move into our next virtual field trip. And I just want to pass on the regards from Josh Meek, forester for Port Blakely Tree Farms. He wants to know, he said great tour, and he's curious if you had any issues selling Ponderosa pine at the West Side Mills. Chris Maish, who is the vice president of SAF from Alaska, passed on his regards and said that he plans on coming down to visit you. And Bob Boogert, our county commissioner, also shared his appreciation for your presentation.
Thank you very much. Ponderosa pine is a volatile species market-wise. In 17, when we did our commercial harvest, the price was up a little bit, and they were starting to use the pine for other uses that historically they hadn't been using it for. So it increased their value a little bit. I do not know currently how pine is doing in the market. I know lumber prices are sky high, and it might have been a nice time for us to harvest some of our timber around here that needs to be cut. So we'll see. Yeah, it's like the stock market, tree farming.
Very good. Well, thanks again. I sure appreciate your time with us today.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
All right. See ya.
All right.